They laughed at me for stuttering, until the silent Lycan prince spoke only my name. Alara had always been quiet. Not by choice, but because every time she tried to speak in front of the grand hall, the words tumbled out in a jumble, broken and hesitant. Her stutter made her a target for whispers and laughter in the court of Aelvarn, a kingdom of shadows and silver-tipped towers. The nobles called it harmless teasing, but for Alara it was a daily torment that made her feel invisible, as if she were nothing more than the echo of her own mistakes. She spent most of her days in the dusty archives copying royal decrees and ancient texts, her fingers tracing the delicate letters of the past while the present watched and judged her. Books never laughed. Books never turned away, and for that she loved them more than any ballroom or banquet. Tonight, though, was different. The moonlight masquerade was a night she could not avoid. Every noble in Aelvarn had been summoned to the palace, their faces hidden behind gilded masks, their intentions hidden behind layers of silk and perfume. Candles glimmered like stars across the marble floors, and silver chandeliers trembled with the echo of music. Alara's heart pounded in her chest, the familiar fear of speaking before others threatening to choke her. Her dress, a simple gown of deep midnight blue, felt like armor. She held her head high as she stepped into the hall, her hands clutching a scroll she had been assigned to read for the evening ceremony. She knew the nobles would notice her, of course. They always did, but she tried to pretend they did not exist. The moment she entered, the room seemed to pause. There were whispers, small and sharp, like the brushing of swords. "The scribe with the stutter," someone murmured. "She dares to come among us?" Alara's fingers trembled. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, weighing her, judging her. Her voice caught in her throat as she walked toward the dais. The scroll in her hands felt heavier with each step. Then a shadow moved across the edges of the room, silent and powerful. Every whisper stopped, every gaze faltered. The nobles turned their attention, not to Alara, but to him. Prince Cale. The Lycan heir. The silent prince. Cale had never spoken in the court. No one had ever heard his voice. Some said he was cursed. Others said he had never learned to speak. His presence alone was enough to make the bravest noble falter. He was tall, his form lithe but strong, and his eyes glimmered like amber fire under the mask that hid his expression. A hush fell over the ballroom as he stepped forward, and even the music seemed to fade, leaving only the soft sound of his measured steps. Alara froze. Her eyes met his across the crowded hall, and for a moment she felt as if the world had narrowed to only the two of them. Her breath caught. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. She was supposed to read the scroll. She took a deep breath and tried to begin. "F for the king!" she stammered, her voice shaking. She stopped, unable to continue. The words refused her, tangling themselves like threads she could not untangle. Laughter echoed softly from the far side of the hall. A group of young nobles chuckled, mocking the scribe who could not speak properly. Alara's face burned. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows, to run from their cruel eyes. And then, something impossible happened. Cale's voice, deep and resonant, filled the hall. "Alara!" It was a single word. Her name. Spoken with such clarity, such power, that it silenced every laugh, every whisper, every movement. Heads turned toward him in shock. No one had ever heard him speak before. And yet, here he was, calling her name as if the world itself had paused for that moment alone. Alara's knees nearly buckled. Her name. From him, the silent prince. He was looking at her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. The laughter had vanished. Even the music seemed to hold its breath. Alara could not speak, could not move. She only stared, her heart hammering, as Cale's amber eyes met hers. Then he stepped back into the shadows, vanishing before anyone could ask a question. The court erupted in stunned murmurs. Some whispered of magic. Others spoke of curses, but no one dared approach him. Alara stood frozen, clutching the scroll as if it could anchor her to the ground, Her ears still rang with the sound of her name, clear and alive, spoken by the one person she never expected to notice her. Did he just— Yes, another replied, eyes wide. To her. Only her! Alara's mind swirled. Why had he spoken? Why her? The questions tumbled through her like leaves in a storm. And somewhere deep in her chest a spark ignited. A spark of curiosity, of longing, of something dangerous and new. That night, she could not sleep. The image of Cale's eyes haunted her, amber and bright in the darkness of the ballroom. She could feel his gaze on her even when he was not there, a silent weight pressing against her heart. The next morning she returned to her work in the archives, but everything felt different. The scrolls seemed smaller, the shadows longer, and the air heavier with secrets. She found herself glancing toward the palace windows, half hoping, half afraid to see him again. Days passed, and each day Cale appeared, always silent, always watching, sometimes from the edge of the gardens, sometimes across the corridors, and once, inexplicably, in the library where she worked. He never spoke. He never came close enough to touch. Yet she felt him, like a presence pressing gently against the edges of her mind, stirring feelings she did not understand. Alara began to notice other things. The way he moved with the precision of a predator, yet with care. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her, even if his expression remained unreadable behind the mask. And the way the court began to treat her differently, whispering not just about her stutter, but about Cale's interest in her. Fear and excitement twisted inside her. She wanted to approach him, to ask why he had spoken her name that night. But every time she tried, she found her courage failing, her voice trapped behind the walls she had built around it for so long. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sky in crimson and gold, Alara wandered into the palace gardens. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth. She did not expect anyone to be there, and yet there he was. Cale, standing under a twisted silver tree, the moonlight touching his face like a brush of fire. "Alara!" he said. This time she did not need to ask who he was calling. The sound of her name on his lips made her heart leap. She took a hesitant step forward, and for the first time Cale did not vanish. He tilted his head slightly, the amber of his eyes glowing softly. She did not know what he wanted, or what would happen next. The air between them thrummed with tension, fear, curiosity, longing, all tangled together. "Alara!" he repeated, but this time his voice was softer, almost a whisper, carrying something that words could not describe. She swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to ask, to reach out. But her stutter held her back. Her lips trembled. And then, a sudden rustling in the bushes nearby made them both turn. The palace guards were nowhere in sight, but Alara sensed danger, an unseen threat that seemed drawn to her and Cale alike. Before she could react, Cale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the darkness. His form shifted subtly, almost as if the moonlight itself had carved strength into his frame. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she felt safe in his presence. Even his fear prickled along her spine. "Alara," he said once more, and in that single word she felt the weight of promise and warning, of protection and something far more profound. And then he was gone. Alara was left alone in the garden, the echoes of his voice lingering in the night. Her heart raced, her mind swirled with questions, and a shiver of anticipation ran through her. She did not know what the future held, or why the silent prince had chosen to speak to her. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, the wind whispered through the silver leaves, carrying her name as if the night itself had learned it. And somewhere in the shadows Cale watched, waiting, silent but present, bound by a secret she had yet to uncover. The world of Aelvarn, once dull and cruel, had suddenly grown alive with danger, magic, and possibility. And Alara, the girl who had been mocked for speaking imperfectly, found herself standing at the edge of a story she never thought she could belong to, a story written in shadows, moonlight, and the voice of a prince who had chosen her above all others. And in the silence that followed, the first thread of fate began to pull them together, binding them in ways neither could yet understand. The days after the moonlight masquerade passed like a slow dream. Elara returned to her work in the palace archives, but her mind was elsewhere, filled with the image of Kale's amber eyes, the sound of her name spoken so clearly it still echoed in her chest. She tried to focus on copying ancient decrees, but every shadow in the tall windows seemed to hold his presence. Every whisper of the wind through the corridors felt like a reminder that he was watching. Kale had not appeared in the court since that night, yet Elara sensed him everywhere. And then, just when she thought she could convince herself it was only imagination, she saw him. It was in the garden, at the edge of the palace grounds where the hedges grew tall and dark. She had been gathering herbs for the healer, her small basket swinging at her side when she froze. Kale stood among the shadows, half hidden beneath a twisted silver oak. The moonlight touched his sharp features, highlighting the curve of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. "Elara!" he said. She jumped slightly, startled, but her heart leapt as well. His voice, though soft, carried that same weight, that same strange power, making her feel both safe and exposed at once. Kale did not move closer. He simply watched her, silent except for that single word. Elara wanted to ask him why he kept appearing, why he had chosen her, but the words stuck in her throat. Her stutter, her old fear seemed stronger when he was near, as if her courage had to grow in pieces before she could reach him. She took a careful step forward. Why do you... Come here!" she stammered, the words trembling in her mouth. Kal tilted his head. He said nothing else. His silence, heavy and deliberate, spoke more than words ever could. Elara felt a strange comfort in it, as if he understood her without her needing to speak perfectly. For days, this became their unspoken ritual. She would walk in the gardens and he would appear in the shadows. Sometimes he would vanish when she tried to approach, leaving only a sense of his presence behind. Other times he would remain, watching quietly, amber eyes fixed on her as if studying the rhythm of her heart. Elara began to notice the subtle details about him, the way his body moved with controlled strength, the faint shift of muscles beneath his tunic, the almost imperceptible glow of his eyes in moonlight. He was dangerous, yes, but not cruel. There was a gentleness in him, a careful attention, as if he were learning her, understanding her in a way no one else had ever tried. One evening, curiosity overcame her fear. She followed him when he left the palace gardens, slipping between shadows and hedges until they reached the edge of Silver Pine Forest. The forest was ancient and alive, its tall trees whispering secrets on the wind. Moonlight scattered through the thick branches, casting silver patterns on the moss-covered ground. Kale entered the forest without hesitation. Elara hesitated at the edge. She knew the stories. Silver Pine was not a place for ordinary people. It was the home of Kale's Lycan pack, creatures bound by loyalty and power, capable of destruction and protection in equal measure. People said the forest itself could sense fear. She swallowed hard and stepped inside. The forest closed around her, shadows and moonlight weaving together. Every step made the hairs on her neck rise. Then she saw them, the Lycan guardians. They were massive, with sharp eyes that glimmered in the moonlight. Some crouched low, tails swishing behind them. Others stood tall, their fur a mixture of silver and shadow. They did not growl, did not attack, but their presence made it clear. This was their domain, and she was an intruder. Kale walked between the trees like he belonged there, his movements natural, powerful, yet controlled. The pack parted for him, giving him way as he led her deeper into the forest. Elara, he said again, his voice low, almost a whisper. But in the quiet of the forest it carried farther than any shout. She felt her chest tighten. This forest was alive with power, with danger, yet Kale's presence made her feel safe. Tentatively, she followed. They reached a clearing where the moonlight fell in silver circles upon the moss. Kale stopped. He did not speak further, but Elara noticed something new. A small scar across his hand, faint but present, as if it told a story he refused to share. "Elara!" she whispered to herself, wishing she could speak more, but the words would not come. Then a rustling came from the shadows. Elara froze. She sensed danger. The forest seemed to shiver with it. Kyle's body tensed. The Lycan guardians moved silently, forming a protective circle around them. His amber eyes glowed brighter. "You are not afraid?" she asked, voice barely audible. Kale's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. His voice, deep and calm, echoed in her mind more than in her ears. "You must trust!" She nodded. Even though fear still tightened her stomach, the forest felt alive, as if it tested her, asking if she belonged here, asking if she could survive what was coming. Days passed and Elara continued to visit the forest, each time learning more about Kale's world. She saw how the pack respected him, how he moved with the silent authority of a leader. She realized he was not simply a cursed prince, he was a protector, a guardian, bound by a secret she could only begin to imagine. And through it all, their bond grew, not with words, but with gestures, glances, and small acts of care. Kale would leave gifts for her, a flower, a feather, a smooth stone, always placed carefully where she would find it. Sometimes he would allow her to touch his arm briefly, a fleeting brush of skin that sent warmth through her entire body. Each moment was charged with emotion, unspoken and pure. But danger was never far away. The court had noticed Kale's interest in her, and whispers of jealousy and schemes spread like wildfire. A rival noble, Lord Veyron, began plotting. He knew of Kale's curse, of the silence that bound him, and he sought to use it to control the prince, and, through him, the kingdom. Elara's presence was a complication, a threat to his plans. One night, as she returned from the forest, Elara felt eyes watching her from the shadows of the palace. She quickened her pace, heart hammering. When she reached her small room, she found a note slipped under the door. "Do not trust the voices of the court. Some seek to use you." Her hands shook as she read it. "Only one person could have left this. Kale. His warning was clear, but so was the danger." If the court learned of their secret connection, if Lord Veyron acted, she could be caught in a trap she did not understand. The next evening she returned to the forest, determined to see Kale. She needed answers, even if she could not speak them aloud. As she reached the clearing, she saw him standing there, tense, alert. The Lycan pack flanked him, silent and ready. "Elara," he said, and his voice carried a weight she could feel in her bones. She wanted to ask him everything, why he was cursed, why he had chosen her, what threat the court posed, but she could not. Words would fail her. She only stood there, her hands trembling, her chest tight with emotion. Kale stepped forward, and for the first time, he reached out. His hand hovered near hers, as if testing the boundary. Slowly, she placed her palm against his. The contact was electric, sending warmth through her body and a strange sense of connection. In that instant, she understood something she had never known before. The silence between them was not emptiness. It was language. A language of trust, protection, and something deeper. Something that stirred in her heart and would not let go. But even as she felt the bond strengthen, the forest trembled. A dark shape moved at the edge of the clearing, unseen but unmistakable. The Lycan guardians growled low, their eyes fixed on the shadow. Kale stiffened, muscles coiled like springs ready to strike. "Elara!" he whispered urgently. Before she could react, the shape moved closer, a figure cloaked in darkness, the glint of steel catching the moonlight. Lord Veyron had followed her. He knew of her connection to Kale, and he intended to use it for his gain. Kale's voice, low and commanding, broke the tense silence. "Stay behind me."
Alara's heart pounded.
Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she clenched her fists, drawing courage from the bond she shared with Kale. The Lycan pack spread out, forming a living barrier between them and the intruder. Lord Veyron stepped into the clearing, a cruel smile on his lips. "So this is the girl the silent prince cannot resist," he sneered. "You think you are safe, little scribe? You are in my hands now." He simply moved, a blur of shadow and strength, standing firmly in front of Alara. His eyes glowed amber, and for the first time he spoke more than her name. "Leave!" he said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a promise and a threat. Veyran laughed, but even his confidence wavered as the Lycan guardians growled, circling him. He backed away slowly, realizing that the prince was not a boy to be toyed with, and that the forest itself seemed to obey him. Alara felt her breath return in shaky bursts. Cale's gaze softened when he looked at her, and he reached out again, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. In that single, silent gesture she felt the truth. He would protect her, no matter what. And as they stood in the moonlit clearing, the wind carrying the scent of earth and leaves, Alara understood that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just the timid scribe with a stutter. She was part of something larger, something dangerous and magical, something that bound her to the silent prince and his world of shadows and secrets. The night was quiet again, but the threat of the court still lingered. Lord Veyran would not give up. And as Alara and Cale left the forest together, she knew that their bond would be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. The silent prince had spoken her name, and now the threads of fate were pulling them into a story neither could escape. Alara could feel the weight of the palace and the forest pressing on her heart. Every day since the encounter with Lord Veyran, she had lived with the same gnawing fear. The danger was growing, and she could not hide from it. Yet the thought of Cale gave her courage. The silent prince who had spoken only her name had become more than a presence. He was her anchor, the one thread of safety in a world filled with shadows. She could not explain why she felt this way. How could a girl, laughed at for her stutter, feel so strongly about a prince who barely spoke? But every gesture, every glance from Cale carried meaning more powerful than words. Each silent conversation between them pulled her closer to a truth she could not yet name. The night was thick with mist when Cale appeared at the edge of the forest, as always. His amber eyes glowed faintly through the darkness. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow. She obeyed instinctively, her heart pounding. This time, they did not wander through the familiar paths of Silverpine Forest. Cale led her toward the ruins of Moonspire Keep, a place older than the kingdom itself, where shadows clung to broken stone and whispered secrets of the past. "Alara," he murmured once, his voice low, carrying more emotion than she had ever heard. "Stay close." The ruins rose before them, jagged against the silver moonlight. Crumbling towers and shattered walls told stories of battles and betrayal, of curses cast and promises broken. Alara shivered. The air here felt thick, heavy with old magic, and she sensed that this night would change everything. Cale moved silently, weaving through the rubble as if he had been there 1,000 times before. Alara followed, careful not to stumble over the broken stones. She had never seen him like this, so powerful, so focused, yet so protective. The Lycan guardians moved around them, eyes glowing, alert to every sound. "Alara!" Cale said again, his voice barely a whisper. "This place holds what you must know." They reached the heart of the ruins, a circular chamber, its walls etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. At the center lay a stone altar, cracked and worn by time. Cale approached it, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing ghosts of the past. Alara took a hesitant step forward. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cale turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw the weight of his burden in his eyes. He did not speak, but he raised a hand toward the symbols on the wall. Slowly, he traced the lines with his fingers as if reading a language only he could understand. The room seemed to hum with energy. Alara felt a chill crawl up her spine. She understood now that this place was not just ruins, it was a key to Cale's curse, a prison built of magic and broken promises. Cale's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "I was bound to this silence by my own family, by an ancestor who betrayed our pack. Every word I speak could bring ruin." Alara's heart ached. You suffer alone?" He nodded, amber eyes fixed on hers. He wanted to speak more, she could see it, but the curse held him tight, silencing him whenever he risked revealing too much. "Then I will help," she whispered, feeling courage rise within her chest. I do not care. I will be with you." Even if her words faltered, her stutter returning, but she continued. "Even if it is dangerous." Cale's gaze softened, and for a moment his hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her entire body. The connection between them deepened, unspoken yet undeniable. But their moment of fragile peace did not last. A rustling at the edge of the chamber made Alara jump. Shadows moved, and before she could react, figures emerged. Agents of Lord Varen determined to exploit Cale's curse and capture them both. Cale's stance shifted instantly, muscles coiling with the strength of a predator. The Lycan guardians flanked him, growls low and threatening. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Alara, though she could barely hear him. Alara's heart raced, but she did not run. She had come too far to retreat now. She watched as Cale moved with lethal precision, yet without cruelty. The shadows of the intruders twisted and lunged, but the guardians intercepted them, snarling and snapping. Cale's amber eyes glowed brighter, and she could see the struggle against the curse, the effort to speak without losing control of the dangerous magic that bound him. The battle was brief but intense. The intruders retreated, leaving Alara and Cale in the moonlit ruins. Her chest heaved, adrenaline and fear mingling in her veins. She realized with sudden clarity how fragile their safety truly was. Cale's silence was both a shield and a prison, and she had no idea how to break it safely. Cale approached her again, this time closer. He did not speak, but his eyes, bright, amber, alive, spoke volumes. He needed her, and she needed him. She reached out, her hand finding his. The touch was gentle, reassuring, a promise in the darkness. "Alara," his voice trembled slightly. "A rare slip against the curse." She felt it like a shock, the sound of her name stronger than any word she had ever heard. Tears pricked at her eyes. "Cale! I'm here!" she said, her own voice catching in her throat. "I will not leave you." The moment was broken by a sudden tremor. The ruins shuddered as if the stones themselves were alive. Cale's eyes widened. "The curse! It awakens!" Alara felt the air grow heavy. Symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing with light. Shadows stretched across the chamber like reaching fingers. She sensed danger unlike any they had faced before, something old, ancient, tied to Cale's family and the betrayal that had cursed him. Cale moved to the altar, placing his hands upon it. The energy surged, and for a moment his voice was freed. He called her name again, more fully this time, a sound that resonated through the ruins. "Alara!" The sound carried power, magic, and warning. She felt the energy swirl around them, pulling at her and testing her courage. She could see the effort it cost him to speak, and her heart ached. She wanted to ease his burden, to take the weight upon herself if she could. "Alara, trust me," Cale said, his voice steady now, but every word a battle against the curse. "I do," she whispered, gripping his hands. I trust you." They stood together hand in hand as the ruins trembled and the shadows thickened. The curse's magic was awakening fully, responding to Cale's words and their bond. She realized with a mixture of fear and wonder that their connection was the key. His voice, her courage, their trust could shape what happened next. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. From the edge of the chamber a figure stepped into the moonlight. Lord Varen himself, eyes glinting with malice. He had returned, more determined than before. And he was not alone. Behind him, others emerged, shadows ready to strike. Cale's amber eyes flared. "Stay behind me," he said, voice stronger now, the curse straining but holding. The Lycan guardians growled, forming a living wall of protection. Alara felt fear rise, but she did not move away. She stood with him, hand in his, feeling the pulse of power between them. For the first time, she understood the true weight of Cale's curse, the silence, the restraint, the constant battle against something greater than himself, and she knew she could not leave him to face it alone. Veyran stepped closer, a cruel smile on his lips. "You think you can defy me, Prince?" he said. "You cannot, and she is nothing without you." Kale's gaze did not waver. He placed himself between Alara and Veyran, strength and courage radiating from his form. "No," he said, his voice low, powerful and filled with determination. "She is mine to protect. You will not touch her." The words echoed through the chamber. The ruins seemed to respond, the symbols glowing brighter, as if the magic itself recognized the truth of his declaration. Alara felt a surge of pride and fear. She realized that Kale's voice, freed even briefly, carried more than sound. It carried truth, love, and protection. And in that truth, she found her own courage. She stepped forward slightly, her voice shaking but clear. He does not face this alone, and neither do I." Kale looked at her, eyes wide. Amber fire met determination, and for the first time the curse seemed to hesitate, as if acknowledging her bravery. Veyran's eyes narrowed. He realized too late that the bond between them was stronger than his schemes. With a frustrated growl, he retreated, melting back into the shadows. The Lycan guardians relaxed slightly, but the ruin still pulsed with lingering energy. Kale turned to her, voice soft now, almost whispering. "You are brave, far braver than I expected." Alara smiled faintly, tears brimming.
I follow you, Kale. Always."
And in that moment, amidst the ruins of Moonspire Keep, the first true thread of hope began to weave itself. Kale's curse was powerful, yes, but together they had discovered something stronger. Trust, courage, and the beginnings of love that could defy even ancient magic. But deep in the shadows beyond the ruins, Alara sensed it. Another presence, watching, waiting, patient. Their victory was only temporary. The story was far from over. The silent prince and the timid scribe had found each other, yes, but the chains of the past were not yet broken. And the next test would demand everything from them both, voice, heart, and soul. The ruins of Moonspire Keep stood silent under the silver gaze of the full moon. Alara shivered, clutching her cloak tightly around her shoulders. The wind whispered through the broken towers, carrying echoes of battles long past, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. Tonight, the air was thick with tension. The final confrontation was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Kale stood before her, his amber eyes glowing like fire in the darkness. The Lycan prince, once silent and distant, now radiated a quiet, commanding power. The curse that had bound him for so long pulsed faintly around him, testing his control. He glanced at her, and in that single look, Alara saw everything, laughers and the weight of responsibility. "Alara," he whispered, his voice low but steady, carrying the full force of the bond between them. "Tonight, we face everything." She nodded, though her heart trembled. I'm ready," she stammered, but the words carried a strength she had not known she possessed. "She would not leave him, not now, not ever." The wind shifted, and from the shadows, a figure emerged. Lord Veyran, cruel and cunning, stepped into the clearing, flanked by masked allies who carried weapons gleaming under the moonlight. His lips curled into a sneer. "So, the prince finally speaks," he said. "And the scribe dares to follow him." How amusing! Kale moved forward, his presence commanding. "Leave," he said, voice steady, resonant. "This ends tonight." Veyran laughed, but it was sharp and empty. "You think your silence or your love can stop me? The curse binds you. And she is nothing without you." Alara felt a surge of anger and fear. "No!" she cried, stepping forward, hand in Kale's. "I am with him. I am strong. I will not let you harm him. Kale's eyes softened, and he gave a subtle nod, silently approving her courage. The bond between them was stronger than any threat. He took a deep breath, and for the first time he raised his voice fully, the curse struggling but yielding. Elara, stay close. Trust me! Always! The words resonated through the ruins, the magic of the place responding to his voice and their connection. The shadows around them trembled. Baron faltered, sensing the ancient power at work. Suddenly the air shifted. The ruins seemed alive, stones vibrating and the symbols etched into the walls glowing brightly. Kale's curse, once a prison, now became a conduit of energy, powered by the trust and courage he shared with Elara. Together, they could face what had haunted him for generations. The Lycan guardians moved to form a protective circle around them, growling and baring their teeth. Elara stood firmly beside Kale, her hand in his, feeling the pulse of magic and life between them. She realized something crucial. Her courage, her belief in him, was a part of the spell. Her presence gave him strength, and his voice gave her purpose. Veyran raised his hand, attempting to strike with a dark spell, but the energy between Kale and Elara flared, pushing the shadows back. The ruins themselves responded, stones lifting slightly as if forming a barrier. Veyran stumbled, his confidence shaken for the first time. Kale moved swiftly, a blur of motion, not attacking with cruelty but with precision and control. Every step, every gesture was a combination of strength and restraint. The Lycan guardians intercepted the intruders, forcing them back with careful, coordinated movements. Elara! Watch! Kale called, his voice breaking free in bursts. The curse strained against him, but he held it, channeling his energy outward. Elara focused, steadying herself. She could feel the pull of the magic, the flow of power from Kale, and the presence of the ruins themselves. Together they became a single force, a bond of courage and love that pushed against the darkness. Veyran screamed in frustration. You cannot! But before he could finish, Kale's voice surged again, louder and stronger than before. Elara! Together! At that moment, Elara stepped forward fully, no fear in her heart. Together! She echoed, her voice clear and strong. The words rang through the ruins, joining Kale's energy. The curse that had silenced him began to unravel, the chains of the past breaking under the weight of their connection. A blinding wave of light and magic surged from the altar, engulfing the chamber. The intruders were thrown back, their weapons useless against the force of their bond. Veyran screamed again, retreating into the shadows, realizing that he had been defeated not by violence alone, but by love, trust, and courage combined. When the light faded, the ruins were quiet. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, then dimmed. The air felt lighter, freer. Kale stood beside Elara, his chest heaving, amber eyes glowing softly. He looked at her and smiled, a small, genuine smile that carried relief, triumph, and affection. Elara, he said softly. No curse holding back. You saved me. Tears filled her eyes. No, KL, you saved me too. You taught me to be brave. He reached out, taking both her hands in his. The warmth of his touch, the solidity of his presence grounded her. The ruins no longer felt haunted. They felt alive with possibility. The curse that had bound him for so long had been broken not by force alone, but by trust, love, and courage. For the first time, Kale spoke freely, words flowing like a river released from a dam. I can speak now, all of it. My family's mistakes, my silence, it ends here. With you. Alara's heart swelled. And I will stay with you. Always. They embraced, hands entwined, hearts beating as one. The ruins, the shadows, the danger, they had faced it all together and emerged stronger. The bond between them was no longer fragile or tentative. It was unbreakable. As dawn began to break, silver light spilling over the towers and rubble, the palace in the distance seemed distant and small. Elara and Kale stood atop the ruins, looking at the kingdom that awaited them. There would be challenges ahead, political schemes, and perhaps remnants of old curses, but together they could face anything. Kale's hand brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Forever," he whispered,
Amber eyes soft but unwavering. Alara smiled, her stutter gone in that moment of clarity.
"Forever," she repeated, strong and true. And then, as if the ruins themselves had decided to bless them, the first rays of sunlight touched the broken stone, casting the shadows aside. They stood together, the silent prince and the once timid scribe, no longer defined by fear or weakness. They had found redemption, and more than that, they had found each other. Even in the distance, Ilara sensed a faint movement, a shadow watching from the edge of the forest. But this time, it did not matter. They had survived, they had fought, and their bond had proven stronger than any curse, any threat. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. Hand in hand, Kale and Alara descended from the ruins, leaving behind the darkness of the past and stepping into a future bright with trust, courage, and love. The kingdom of Aelvarn awaited them, but no court intrigue, no magic, and no shadow could shake the strength they had forged in the moonlit ruins of Moonspire Keep. And as they walked into the morning light, their hearts aligned. They knew this was only the beginning of their story. A story of love that could silence curses, break chains, and turn even the darkest night into a dawn of hope.